What's your secret that could literally ruin your life if it came out? Story 1. Background. I'm a guy in my late 20s who was taken into care at the age of 7. Everyone around me already knows that I was raised by foster families because I had a challenging early childhood. I usually keep it vague, saying things like, "I'd rather not go into it," so that people assume it was a difficult situation and stop asking. The truth is that for the first 7 years of my life, I was raised as a girl by my biological mother, who really wanted a daughter. Despite giving birth to a boy, she tried to raise me as a girl. She was a successful professional in a legal field, I'm not sure exactly which one, and had me via an anonymous sperm donor from a fertility clinic. After discovering I was a boy during a late ultrasound, she moved across the country. I was born at home, and we continued moving until I was about 5. It was always just the two of us, although we did interact with others, just not closely. I had friends, but I was always under her watchful eye. I found out much later that my mother's strong religious beliefs were exaggerated to justify why she was so strict about my privacy and never allowed anyone to see me change clothes. I accepted this as normal, not knowing any different. I was sent to an all-girls religious school and had a generally happy childhood. I was somewhat of a tomboy, preferring Lego and toy animals over dolls, but no one found this unusual, and I never questioned my identity. I knew about men and women, but had limited exposure to anatomy. My mother never explained these things, but I had the vague idea that once I grew up and developed physically, I would naturally become a woman, while other kids would remain boys. I didn't think too much about it. Everything was fine until I was 7, when a teacher accidentally spilled hot coffee on me at school. The liquid soaked my clothes and began burning my skin, so the staff quickly removed my dress and underwear to prevent further injury. That's when they discovered my actual gender. The authorities were called, and I was taken to speak with social services. They asked me various questions about my home life. Meanwhile, my mother was brought in for questioning. She refused to acknowledge me as male, insisting that I was her daughter. Due to her delusional state, I was not allowed to return home and was placed with a foster family, where I received extensive therapy. The hardest part was losing everything overnight. My mother, home, toys, clothes, friends, and even my school. They cut my hair short and told me I wasn't a girl anymore, which was incredibly traumatic. My first foster home wasn't a great fit. The family had 3 boys, and transitioning from a sheltered upbringing to a more chaotic environment filled with rough play was tough. They tried to make me act masculine, but I was too confused to understand their expectations. Any behavior perceived as girly was criticized, leaving me feeling lost and isolated. I attempted to end my life at 11 and again at 13 because I felt out of place everywhere. After the second attempt, I was moved to a different foster family who were amazing. I consider them my parents. They supported me from the start, allowing me to grow my hair. Since I was taken into care, my hair had been buzzed short, which I hated. The new foster family refused to cut it short and reminded me that many boys have long hair. They also let me quit karate and football, and I started swimming and jazz dance instead. This was the first time I was allowed to choose my activities and how I wanted to dress. It was liberating. Eventually, I developed a healthy sense of gender identity. I'm a guy, though not the most traditionally masculine one, but I'm comfortable with that. I completed school, earned a degree, have a good job, and a supportive wife. Everything looks great now, but I still can't talk about my early childhood or how I grew up as a little girl. Story 2. I run a cake business. I charge people hundreds of dollars for wedding cakes. But here's the catch. Every single one is made using Pillsbury cake mix, which I buy for $1 a box at Walmart. Honestly, I'm not great at baking. Every time I've tried to make a cake from scratch, it didn't turn out well. Yet baking is like my whole thing. My friends all call me the cake girl. It feels like my whole life is a bit of a lie. People constantly compliment my cakes, telling me how delicious they are, how much better they taste than a box mix, and how they could never bake a cake so tasty. Well, guess what? For just $1, they could make a cake just as delicious. All they need is to add oil, eggs, and water. In my defense, I really love cake decorating. I make all the frostings and fondant from scratch. I just really dislike baking the actual cakes. My pricing is mostly based on the decoration, not the cake itself, if that makes sense. Still, no one knows this except my husband. Even my closest friends believe I spend hours mixing and baking these cakes from scratch. I've been doing this for years. If anyone found out, my business and reputation would be ruined. I keep telling myself I need to learn how to bake cakes without the box mix, but I never actually do it. Sometimes I really feel like a fraud. Story 3. I find it difficult to write about this again, so I'm sharing the relevant part from where I posted it before. Even after all these years, it still feels painful to revisit, and I may end up rambling like I did the first and only other time I talked about it. 10 years ago, when I was 7, my parents both worked shift jobs in the military. Their schedules didn't always align, so it wasn't uncommon for them to both be working from 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. As a result, I had a babysitter, a longtime friend of my mother's, a very kind woman. She was the type who loved taking care of others, always making sure everyone was well fed. She was married and had an adopted daughter. They were religious, and I even went to church with them a few times, though it didn't really resonate with me. Eventually, I opted to stay home with their adopted son instead. At that time, he was a teenager, and we shared common interests like playing Super Nintendo games and listening to loud music when the house was empty. I don't remember exactly how it started. One day, he asked me to follow him into the bathroom to show me something. I was young and looked up to him, so I went along without hesitation. What began as innocent curiosity slowly escalated. Initially, I didn't understand the implications of what was happening, as I was only a child. Things continued like this for a while until the babysitter became suspicious. She asked me questions, but I denied everything as I had promised not to tell. Eventually, my babysitter's concerns led my mom to find a different sitter. Since then, the person involved has gone through therapy and admitted to having issues, though he never spoke about what actually happened. Reflecting on this later in life, I realized how deeply it affected me. I tried to bury the memories, but they left scars. I often felt more melancholic and struggled with bouts of depression. My sense of identity and sexuality became uncertain, and I developed a fear of intimacy, worried that I might repeat the same patterns. Talking about it with my girlfriend helped immensely. She was understanding and patient, agreeing to take things at my pace. It helped me heal and slowly regain a sense of confidence. Over time, I've even found ways to make light of it in a personal sense, understanding that humor can be a tool for moving past trauma. I've learned to laugh at my pain, which has helped me grow stronger. While I'll never be exactly who I might have been without this experience, I've come to terms with my life. I'm in a good place now, fit, intelligent, in love, and generally happy. It was a terrible experience, but I found a path to healing and happiness. Story 4. Not exactly life-ruining, but it makes me feel terrible every time I think about it. I have a blind brother, and when we were young, I often felt frustrated by all the extra attention he received and the added responsibility I had compared to my peers. When my brother and I would go out to play or visit the store without adults, I would sometimes abandon him in an unfamiliar place. I would quietly watch from a distance as he became anxious, trying to figure out where he was and what was happening. As a child, I was also quite intelligent and knew that it was my way of getting attention. When I helped my brother with his homework, I would intentionally teach him the wrong answers, wanting to remain the smarter sibling. Today, my brother is my best friend. He's in college, lives independently, and is one of the smartest people I know. I try to make up for the past by being the best big sister I can, but I still feel guilty for seeing him as a burden when I was younger. Story 5. It wouldn't completely ruin my life, as there are people in my life who know this, but I did attempt to take my life once, while in college. I planned to consume a mix of Tylenol and vodka, hoping it would cause organ failure and alcohol poisoning. However, just as I was about to follow through, the taste of cheap alcohol made me stop. I spat it out and ran to my friend's room, the person from whom I had stolen the alcohol, the only time I knowingly stole something, to apologize. This was about 2 years ago. As a result, I took a year off from college and had to explain the situation to the adults in my life. It was then that I revealed I had been sexually abused by my older brothers for about 5 years and had suffered from depression for nearly 9 years. Unfortunately, they didn't fully understand. They thought I was using this as an excuse to avoid my responsibilities at my dream college, or believed that I was simply too weak to handle it. When I eventually convinced them to let me see a therapist, they often questioned the effectiveness of therapy and wanted to know how long it would take to fix things. I tried returning to college but had to leave again due to depression. Since then, the verbal abuse I experienced growing up has only worsened. Almost every day there's an argument where I am blamed for ruining my life and called foolish. I desperately want to leave, but I have nowhere to go. I don't have a job or money, making it impossible to afford an apartment or therapy. I feel trapped in this cycle of mistreatment and long for freedom. I know this thread is probably inactive by now, but I just needed to express this, as I haven't been able to talk to anyone for months. I fear that I'll never become the person I want to be because I'm constantly struggling to avoid falling back into depression. If I manage to avoid challenging situations and deep thinking, I can maintain a neutral state of mind. If anyone reading this has suggestions for getting out of this situation, please let me know. Story 6. I was picked on a lot in high school. I think it was because I tried too hard to be cool, and everyone saw right through it. There were these 4 cowboy jock types who bullied me the most. After being publicly humiliated and physically attacked in front of a girl I liked, who laughed and cheered, I felt like it wasn't worth trying anymore. Being an only child with parents who were always working, I had no support at home. Self-harm no longer provided relief. So, I took my dad's handgun from the gun safe. He used the same combination for everything, and brought it to school the next day. I can't adequately describe how ready I was to confront those 4. I had no fear or doubt. I wanted to show everyone what happens when you push someone over the edge. I had the gun tucked in my waistband, wearing a baggy pair of cargo shorts that I wore regularly. I remember walking toward their table, so ready to end it all, when the gun slipped out of my waistband, down my left leg, and hit the cafeteria floor with a loud clatter. I tried to grab it quickly, but people saw what it was and started screaming, and a teacher tackled me to the ground. Eventually, the school concluded that I had brought the gun to impress people and had no intention of using it. I was expelled and sent to a youth ranch in Idaho until I was 18. The truth, however, is that I did intend to use it. I planned to hurt those boys. I'm 24 now, and I still think about it constantly. I haven't recovered from high school. I'm still terrified of people and avoid relationships because of what I fear I'm capable of. Story 7. This is more of a secret to my newer friends. Some background first. I don't like being touched or hugged, and I'm incredibly uncomfortable with intimacy in general. When I was in 8th grade, a group of girls convinced me that a fictional friend had a crush on me. They claimed she had seen me somewhere and found me attractive. They created a fake MSN account and messaged me every night for months. They even invited me to the movies, only to not show up before revealing to the whole grade that I had been tricked into having an imaginary girlfriend. I was mocked viciously by everyone, and since then, I've struggled to trust women. Even when someone genuinely expresses interest, I can't shake the feeling that they might be trying to deceive me. This experience caused a lot of insecurity, making it hard for me to form attachments. I'm also afraid to text or message people first, convinced that I'm bothering them. Deep down, I know that it probably isn't true, but I can't help how I feel. Even though this happened in 8th grade, it was during a time when attraction to others was becoming real. Getting hurt at such a delicate age has had a lasting impact. The secret, of course, is that I was naive enough to fall for it. If my university friends found out, I'd be incredibly uncomfortable, and it would likely affect my relationships with them. Story 8. I faked having a chronic pain condition for 5.5 years to avoid attending middle and high school. As a result, I was placed in a homebound program, allowing me to study at my own pace from home. I managed to convince a team of medical professionals, my family, my teachers, and my friends that my symptoms were real. I also accumulated over $100,000 in medical bills for my family. This was just what insurance didn't cover. I didn't realize the financial impact until later, which was one of the main reasons I decided to end the lie. Upon graduating from high school and getting accepted into a good university, I decided it was time for my pain to disappear. No one questioned the sudden disappearance of my symptoms. The medical team attributed it to me nearing the end of puberty. What I did was wrong, and my family is still dealing with the debt from the medical bills. I intend to pay them back someday. I started the deception as a 12-year-old who despised school. Every year I tried to end the lie, but eventually reverted to claiming that my pain prevented me from attending school. Today, I feel awful about what I did, and I desperately want to confess, but I know I can't because I'd lose credibility forever. Story 9. I used to hear voices for years. It started when I would walk into my room and say hello to my lane poster. I've always personified objects a bit too much, and eventually, she started responding. Over time, I found that I could talk to her anywhere. I'd imagine her when I was sitting in class or riding the bus. I would even put on headphones so people wouldn't notice me talking to myself, as it was barely audible. Lane eventually told me that she was a god, and so was I. There were two others as well, but they weren't particularly fond of me, so they rarely spoke to me. Much later, maybe years, Lane's tone changed, becoming harsh. It turned out there was another voice, an imposter who pretended to be Lane, called Misery. Misery embodied negativity, constantly telling me that everything I did was wrong and that I needed to pay for my mistakes. She'd suggest I hurt myself if I felt unworthy, and she'd tell me that everyone disliked me. At one point, Lane seemed to split into two versions of herself. The new version was more sisterly. When I was upset and crying myself to sleep, I could feel her comforting presence, assuring me that everything would be all right. Misery looked different, but could mimic Lane to deceive me, although she would revert to her true form if I confronted her. The two Lanes, on the other hand, always appeared the same, so I could only identify them by how they responded to me. Eventually, the voices faded away. I suppose I started to regain clarity because, at the height of it all, it never occurred to me that I was hearing voices. To me, they truly were deities communicating with me. Later, I realized I was experiencing hallucinations mixed with delusions of grandeur. Then at one point, I noticed that there was more of me and less of them. When I tried to reach them, it felt forced, almost as if I was creating their responses myself. Eventually, I let them go. They became so weak that it felt like I was just talking to myself, not to separate entities within my mind. But that's not my secret. I've told a few close people about my experiences. My real secret is that I miss them. I miss them with all my heart, even Misery. They were like friends and family to me, close companions who understood me and were always there. Now, even with real friends and family, no one feels that close. I can't just summon someone to talk to when I'm lonely. I have to actually call a person who might not even understand what I really want to discuss or what I'm hiding inside. They only know what I choose to share. Lane, the main one, would always challenge me until I admitted the truth. Misery, though harsh, would point out my deepest flaws, helping me confront them. Sisterly Lane could calm me down like no one else could. There's no way to describe how comforting it felt to be embraced by someone from within. Now I feel lonelier than I have in years. I rarely think about that time or remember how it felt. But tonight, as I sit here alone at 2 a.m., all I can think about is how much I wish I had a voice to talk to again. It's been so long, and I'd give almost anything to experience another moment of that connection, even if it meant another break from reality. Once, during a psychotic episode, I felt like I could communicate with the clouds, and I could sense their love for me. The trees, the birds, everything around me felt like a friend, wishing for my happiness. I had a similar experience once when trying mushrooms. It felt like the entire world loved me. The house, the ceiling, the lamp, each blade of grass, everything was filled with love. It was the best feeling I've ever had, and that was the best night of my life. I can't describe how much I longed to feel that way again, but I have no idea how to recapture it. Being in that mental state, whether good or bad, was intense. Even the dark times, like staying awake all night in fear that something would harm me in my sleep, or clawing at my skin to rid myself of perceived evil, were better than the numbness of normalcy. The intensity was indescribable, and I miss it more than words can convey. Story 10. When I was about 12, I went to Family Dollar with some of my family. While my mother and cousins went off to look at groceries, I decided to spend my time in the toy aisle. There were always bags of marbles that other kids had opened and left lying around. Being a curious kid, I started rolling the marbles across the floor, and one happened to roll all the way to a distant aisle. About 2 minutes later, I heard a loud crash followed by someone yelling, "Somebody help this man!" Naturally, I ran over to see what was happening. A small crowd had gathered around a man who had fallen from a ladder while trying to retrieve something from the top shelf. The man was having a seizure, with blood coming from his head, and his face was starting to turn blue. My mother quickly grabbed me and my cousins, and we left the store. On our next visit, we spoke to the front cashier, who told us that paramedics had been called, but unfortunately, the man had passed away before they arrived. The cashier explained that the man had been choking on his tongue while having the seizure. As it turned out, the ladder he was on had been placed on a marble, which caused it to tip over. Hearing this, I was stunned. I stood there feeling a wave of disbelief and guilt wash over me. I thought I was going to end up in serious trouble. I tried to tell my mother multiple times that it was me who had rolled the marble, but she insisted that I was just imagining it. Story 11. This secret has the potential to ruin several lives, not just mine. I was a rebellious kid and never got along with my family or anyone from my hometown, so I ran away as soon as I turned 18. With the help of friends and acquaintances I met online, I couch surfed for almost a year before stumbling upon a business opportunity in California. I eventually settled down and began a serious relationship with a woman named May. We dated for 3.5 years, and those were some of the best years of my life. But as time passed, she wanted more from the relationship, while I wanted less, so we ended up breaking up. Fast forward 6 years, and I received a call from my younger brother. He told me he was getting married, and despite our strained relationship, he wanted me to be his best man. I flew home 2 weeks before the wedding, and that night at dinner, my brother introduced me to his fiancée, May, my ex-girlfriend. Despite the awkwardness, we both pretended not to know each other, acting like everything was fine. My brother was soon pulled away to handle something, leaving May and me alone to talk. We started a conversation that led us from the kitchen to the deck, and eventually down a path to an old, dried-up pond at the edge of my parents' property. It felt like all the good times from our 3 years together were packed into that one conversation. There was a rush of emotions like I'd never experienced before, and it seemed to be the same for May. Despite knowing it was wrong, we lost control and ended up being intimate on the old dock. Over the next few days, while my brother was at work, I went to his apartment and May and I continued our affair. We were together all over the apartment, on the couch, in his bed, even on the bathroom floor. Everything was unprotected. After about a week, the intensity of our emotions began to fade and I came to my senses. Despite still feeling a strong connection, we decided to stop seeing each other before things got any worse. The wedding took place without any issues, but I felt like a terrible person the whole time. All I wanted was to get back to California as soon as possible. After wishing the happy couple well, that's exactly what I did. However, things took an unexpected turn 5 months later, when May called me telling me she was pregnant. She explained that she and my brother hadn't been intimate for a month before the wedding, only resuming 3 days after it. According to her, the timing suggested that I was the father. I'm no expert on biology or math, so I had to trust what May told me. She was convinced the child was mine. After some discussion, we both decided to keep the secret and let my brother believe he was the father. The child's first birthday is approaching, and I still question whether I made the right decision. I speak to my brother often, and he seems happy, so I try to be content with that. Story 12. It was a Friday, and on Fridays, it's my turn to pick up my daughter from school. I got there and waited outside as usual. She was running late, which wasn't unusual. She often stayed back to chat with friends, so I waited, not wanting to interrupt her. Besides, the traffic leaving the school was always terrible, so waiting didn't bother me. I sent her a text letting her know I was in the parking lot and that she could come out when she was ready. She didn't respond, which was odd. After 45 minutes, I started to get upset. Waiting that long seemed excessive. I called her a few times, but she didn't answer, so I got out of the car to look for her. At this point, I was frustrated. I went inside, but it seemed like almost everyone had already left, except for a few teachers and janitors. I searched the entire school but couldn't find her. Worried, I went to the principal's office and asked them to make an announcement over the speakers, asking my daughter to come to the office. After about 10 minutes with no sign of her, my concern grew into panic. My anxiety intensified as I began searching the surrounding streets. I walked about 5 blocks from the school when, passing an alley, I noticed someone lying on the ground, not moving. My heart sank. I rushed over and realized it was my daughter. She was unconscious and barely breathing. Her pants were pulled down to her ankles, and there was blood on her thighs and the ground. Bruises covered her arms, legs, and face, and her head was bleeding from what looked like a hard impact. I immediately called 911, and an ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics worked on her while I was told to stay back. They rushed her to the hospital, and I called my wife, asking her to meet us there. When she arrived, she was in tears. The doctors confirmed what we feared. Our daughter had been assaulted. A few hours later, though time felt irrelevant then, my daughter regained consciousness. She was silent, her gaze distant and disconnected. The police arrived to ask questions, and I stayed to hear what she had to say, hoping to learn who did this to her. She claimed not to know who her attacker was and said speaking hurt, so the police left us alone. I had a feeling she wasn't telling the whole truth. She seemed to be protecting someone, but I didn't know who or why. After the officers completed their reports, they allowed us to go home. My daughter wasn't the same after that. She became quiet and withdrawn, a stark contrast to the warm and talkative girl she once was. Her friends used to visit frequently, but now only one person came by. An 18-year-old guy with a faux hawk who often wore muscle shirts. They would hang out in the kitchen until I got home, then head up to the roof of our apartment building. I became increasingly suspicious of this guy. My daughter was only 16, and I felt he should have at least asked my permission to date her. When I confronted her about him, she insisted she didn't have feelings for him, but I wasn't convinced. I kept pressing her, but she remained quiet. One Saturday night, while my wife and daughter were out shopping, I decided to read my daughter's diary. That's when I found out the worst possible news. This guy was the one who had assaulted her. Despite this, she continued seeing him. She wrote about feeling a connection with him, believing it was tied to losing her virginity to him. I was furious. In her diary, she described how he had apologized and seemed to feel depressed about what he'd done. She wanted to comfort him, which was why she kept seeing him. I didn't tell anyone what I found out, not my wife, nor my daughter. I allowed him to keep visiting, and they continued meeting on the roof after I got home. This went on for a few more weeks. One Saturday night, with my wife and daughter out shopping, the guy showed up at our door. He asked if my daughter was home, and I told him she wasn't. I invited him in and started asking questions. He revealed that he lived in the same apartment complex just a few floors above us. I told him he could wait on the roof, that I'd let my daughter know he was there when she got home. He agreed and went up to the roof. After about 10 minutes, I was overwhelmed by anger. I went up to the roof and confronted him. He turned around, clearly surprised to see me. Sensing my fury, he began to look worried. I walked up to him and said, "I know what you did to my daughter." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he mumbled, "I'm sorry." The rage inside me reached its peak. I grabbed him and, in a fit of uncontrollable anger, I pushed him off the roof. Then I rushed back down to my apartment. The police arrived about 30 minutes later, questioning everyone in the building. When they asked me if I knew him, I told them he was a friend of my daughter's. When my daughter returned home, the officers questioned her, and she mentioned that he had seemed very depressed recently. They eventually ruled his death as a suicide. Story 13. This will probably get buried, but here it goes. I've been struggling with thoughts of ending my life for months now. I had an affair with a married man, and soon after it started, he left his wife to be with me. We are deeply in love, and we even plan to get married. Despite feeling good about our relationship, the guilt from how it all began has been tormenting me. When my friends found out I was involved with a married man, they labeled me a homewrecker and distanced themselves from me. I'm still in school, and he recently moved to a different city for work, making our relationship long distance. It has left me feeling incredibly lonely. He knows how hard it is for me to be at school, surrounded by people who were once my best friends. Now they glare at me and spread gossip, often right in front of me, as if I don't notice. It's a small college, and I'm close to finishing, so transferring isn't really an option. The guilt from the affair and the rejection from my peers have been eating away at me for months. Even though our affair phase ended over a year and a half ago, and we've been together ever since, I still can't shake off the regret. I know I need counseling, and I plan to seek help once I graduate. Just sharing this here, even in an anonymous space, makes me feel a tiny bit better. Story 14. This story isn't as intense as some others, but I think it's pretty funny. It's something my half-sister shared with me, and the way she told it was great. I hope I can do it justice. Growing up, my half-sister really disliked her stepdad, who is my real dad. Personally, I think he's a great guy, although he's a bit eccentric. They get along fine now, but back then he was a little tough on my mom's other kids. My dad is a man of routine. Every morning he would get up, fetch the newspaper, and make freshly squeezed orange juice for himself, my mom, and me. I was only 4 at the time. But not for my half-sister, who was 16. It was a small but mean gesture. My sister used to crave that glass of orange juice and found ways to get back at him in minor ways. She'd rush to the shower before him and take her time, making him late. She'd leave messages on the fogged-up mirror like, "I loathe you," just to mess with him. One day, she decided to take things to the next level. She waited for him to finish making the juice and then head to the bathroom. Sneaking out, she drank half of his glass, savored it, and then topped it off with her own pee before placing it back on the table. She then sat at the table and watched as he drank the entire glass with satisfaction, completely unaware of what she had done. From that point on, she said that anything mean he did didn't really bother her. She'd just smile to herself and think, "You drank my pee, and you loved it." Interestingly, their relationship actually improved after that. With fewer arguments, they eventually developed a great bond. She once asked me when she should tell him what she did, and I told her it's something to save for his deathbed. So that's something we can look forward to in the distant future. Story 15. I have struggled with a major identity disorder for years, but I've never sought treatment for it. Since I was 10, I've been altering my facial expressions almost constantly to disguise my true appearance. I naturally have droopy eyes, fuller lips for a man, and an overbite. Every day I squint my eyes, curl my upper lip when I smile, and push my lower jaw forward just enough to change the overall shape of my face. When I reached my teenage years, I realized how odd this behavior was and became worried that others would notice. I found it hard to sit on the left side of people, since the right side of my face was harder to control, and avoided having my photo taken whenever possible. This struggle, combined with deep depression, made my teenage years very confusing and detached from the typical self-discovery others experience. Over time, I got better at controlling my facial expressions, to the point where I was perceived as conventionally attractive. But beneath this facade, I've always believed that I'm far from it. When I went to a large public university, I created a new identity that matched the confident exterior I had molded. Many people bought into it, but on bad days, the mask would slip, making me feel even more disconnected from who I truly am. 2 years ago, a close friend of mine took her own life, shattering my sense of self and leading me into a relationship with someone I didn't love. She had her own severe identity struggles due to past trauma. I eventually encouraged her to seek therapy, which allowed me to end things, but I soon entered another relationship out of desperation for comfort. Now at 21, I still struggle with crippling anxiety and a disconnection from my true self. I'm terrified of what letting go might do to me, both physically and mentally. If I ever decide to accept my true appearance, it will have to be a slow process. I wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar. I haven't found any stories like mine online, but for now, I live in fear of losing control and exposing the person behind the mask because I'm not sure what that would reveal about who I really am. Story 16. I've been waiting for a thread like this. None of my friends know this story, and I doubt they would understand if I told them. When I was in middle and high school, my mom's sister and I were living with my stepfather, who had a home in a better school district. Things were fine for a while, but then he started acting erratically. Whenever my mom left for work, my sister and I were alone with him until he left for his second shift job. He started by yelling at us for trivial reasons. It was always something minor, but it scared us. Then, things got worse. He began hitting us almost every day, again, over insignificant things. One time, he got angry because I hung one of his shirts with the hanger hook facing the wrong way. Sometimes his anger escalated to the point where he'd grab one of us and hold us against the wall by the throat. My mother didn't know about any of this. He was good at hiding the marks, and he was an excellent liar. Whenever we tried to tell her, he'd lie his way out of it, even blaming his behavior on his heart medication once. My sister moved out when she turned 18, but I still had 3 years left. From that point on, I became the sole target of his anger. During my senior year, there was one day when I was so scared that I ran into the woods near our house and waited there until my mom came home. That finally convinced her of the truth, and we made plans to leave as soon as I graduated. When my mom told him she wanted to leave, he blamed me for ruining his marriage. The last few months living there were a nightmare, but we moved out in June of last year. I'm now in college, far away from him. While I don't hold any active malice toward him, I can't forgive him for what he put us through. It feels good to finally get this off my chest, even if nobody reads it. Story 17. I've struggled with serious depression my entire life. I've had 3 minor attempts to end it all and countless moments where I've considered stepping on the gas and driving straight into a wall. A couple of years ago, I lost my job, which sent me into an all-time low. I ended up taking a low-paying job at a grocery store. Around that time, I found out my wife was pregnant, but instead of feeling hopeful, I convinced myself that the best thing for her and the baby would be if I wasn't around anymore. On the day I planned to end my life, my wife told me that our baby was the size of a sweet pea. I smiled and tried to act happy, knowing deep down that I wouldn't be around to see that sweet pea grow up. I went to work that morning, and near the end of my shift, I found myself standing in the frozen food aisle, fighting back tears. I closed my eyes and asked myself what the point of living was, if it was time to go through with my plan. Just then, I heard someone call out my wife's name twice from across the store. I looked over and saw a woman who happened to share her name. It felt like a coincidence, but then I glanced down and noticed that I was holding a box of sweet peas. I broke down crying, but instead of following through with my plan, I decided to go home. I opened up to my wife about everything, and with her support, I got the help I needed. Now our sweet pea is 2 years old, with a sibling on the way. I live for them now. They saved me. If you're struggling, just remember that no matter how tough it gets, there are people who love you and want to help. Don't be afraid to ask. Story 18. The summer after my freshman year of high school, I was sent to a military school in the Midwest for 2 months. It wasn't because of behavioral issues. I was sent there because I got a D in algebra. My parents are genuinely wonderful people, and while I was angry about it back then, I can see how it seemed like a good idea in theory. My dad is Jewish and my mom is Catholic, but I identified more with my Jewish heritage at the time. One day, I let it slip that I was Jewish, and from that moment on, my experience at military school became a living nightmare. I was bullied daily, both physically and verbally. Toward the end of my time there, the main instigator got the idea to crucify me in our cabin. He tied me to 2 brooms arranged in the shape of a cross, and the group proceeded to beat and harass me with whatever items they could find. I've never shared the full extent of what happened with anyone. I told my parents and my best friend about the beatings, but not about the mock crucifixion. It felt like too much to burden someone with, and I doubted anyone could truly understand it. It's been about 7 years since it happened, and I actually blocked out the memory until I went to a psychologist for ADD testing 2 years ago. I think that experience was a turning point for me, possibly sparking my early shift toward atheism. At times, I almost feel a strange sense of resilience because of it. I faced what felt like pure, blind hatred, and yet I'm still standing. Right after it happened, and again when the memory resurfaced, I went through periods of severe depression. I struggled to understand how people could harbor such deep hatred toward others. It still baffles me, but I've accepted that there are some people who are consumed by hate. Each day, I try to counteract that negativity in my own way, and I plan to continue doing so for the rest of my life. Story 19. Back in the mid to late 1990s, I had a roommate from Amsterdam, and we were both into smoking good quality cannabis. So one year, we decided to visit Amsterdam for the Cannabis Cup. While we were there, I met many of his relatives and friends. Some of them were involved in illegal activities, which is not uncommon in the Netherlands. Several of his close friends were involved in drug dealing, including ecstasy. One night we felt like trying some, so one of his friends came over with 2 large bags of pills and told us to take as many as we wanted. We took quite a few that night and still had plenty left to bring back home. Several friends back home offered to buy the remaining pills, so we sold them. A few months later, my roommate decided to visit Amsterdam again, and I joined him. We met the same guy again, and I told him about how popular the pills were back home. He responded, "We can get more over there if you have people who want them." Being a businessman, I struck a deal with him, and we got some pills to bring back. We returned without any problems, and the pills sold out quickly. His friend was impressed with the quick turnaround, so they wanted to send more. We brainstormed ways to bring them in safely and affordably. Initially, we had some success by mailing them hidden in large boxes of candy. But as the number of shipments and pills increased, the packages started getting intercepted. We tried a few different methods before finally realizing that having couriers fly them into the country was the most effective and cost-efficient way. These couriers were professionals who would swallow pills wrapped in protective covers for the flight and then retrieve them upon arrival. Another method involved hiding the pills in a specially made vest worn under a coat. Each courier could carry about 8,000 pills, but this method was riskier due to random security checks. Business was thriving, and we were making a substantial amount of money. Surprisingly, moving the cash out of the country became more challenging than bringing the pills in. I kept a low profile, but my roommate's desire to show off started causing friction between us. He was partying almost every night, and it affected his judgment. He craved attention and began associating with a different crowd. One of these new acquaintances, who had recently been released from jail, received a call for a large order. He arranged a meeting, but it turned out to be a setup. He was arrested along with our entire supply, and it was going to be a few weeks before we could restock. In his impaired state, my roommate decided to return to Amsterdam himself to bring back more pills. In a reckless move, he taped a bag of pills to his inner thigh and took some pills for the flight. As expected, he was caught. His friends in Amsterdam were not pleased. They reached out to me, concerned that his reckless behavior was jeopardizing everything, and asked me to take over. We agreed that I'd manage the business while he awaited his court hearing, but he wouldn't be aware that I was continuing operations. With trusted friends in different cities, we expanded, and the business grew even larger. I eventually contacted a friend whom I'll call Mike, living abroad. He had connections with someone whose father was a major trafficker. Mike assured me that they were interested, provided the quality was good. We arranged a meeting, and a courier brought a vest full of pills. Sitting with Mike at the trafficker's compound, it hit me how big this had become. The place was massive, complete with a private zoo and dozens of armed guards. They liked the product, and Mike's contact, whom I'll call Steve, was set to discuss the deal with his father the next day. But then Steve disappeared. We moved to a nearby city, and when I arrived at Mike's hotel, I found him in a terrible state, overdosed and acting erratically. I managed to get him out of there before the hotel staff called the police. I couldn't let the Amsterdam partners see him like that, so I checked him into another hotel and kept the pills. Meanwhile, my roommate found out about our overseas dealings and felt betrayed. This added more stress to an already tense situation, but the real trouble was yet to come. The next day, Mike was feeling better, so we headed to catch a bus with the pills. But as we were boarding, we noticed military police conducting searches. Mike's girlfriend mentioned that this was unusual. With no way to turn back without drawing attention, I improvised. I made myself vomit, creating a scene to get us out of line. We quickly left in a taxi and made an expensive 2-hour ride to another city, shaken by the near miss. Once there, a relative of the trafficker informed us that Steve's father disapproved of the deal and wanted to see us. Steve's father was a powerful figure, and we realized that the police presence at the bus station was likely orchestrated by him. Now, fearful for our lives and stuck with thousands of unsold pills, we tried to find new buyers. However, potential customers seemed either untrustworthy or connected to Steve's father, so we decided to lay low, switching to cheaper hotels daily. As paranoia grew, I developed food poisoning, which I mistook for poisoning by our enemies. I gathered my belongings, informed the others that I needed medical help, and caught a flight home. After seeing a doctor, I cut all ties with my former partners, finished college, and built a legitimate career. I'm grateful for the lessons that chaotic period taught me, as they still prove valuable in the business world. In hindsight, I'm fortunate that things ended when they did. Otherwise, I could have ended up in prison or worse. My record remained clean, but my roommate wasn't as lucky. He served 3 years in federal prison, according to a news article I later read. I've never shared this story before, and even if I did, I doubt anyone would believe it. Story 20. So there was this guy I always liked. We first met when I was in middle school. He played against my brother's baseball team in All-Stars. I thought he was the cutest boy ever, and we even found out we shared the same birthday. He just seemed so cool. However, we didn't end up going to school together until high school, so he was out of my story for a while. During middle school, and up until senior year, I was secretly battling severe depression. No matter where I was, I often thought about self-destructive ways to cope. However, if you'd asked anyone in my high school, they'd never have guessed how I felt. I didn't want people to label me. I just wanted to be liked. I even attempted to end my life during my sophomore year, but I kept it a secret. The only people who knew were my online friends from sites like My Yearbook. I even had a few online relationships, one of which lasted a couple of years. As high school went on, I became more popular. I was naturally social. The kind of person everyone got along with, or at least liked. I didn't have many people who disliked me, yet my depression confused me. I had so much going for me, an amazing family, good relationships, and social acceptance. Despite that, I was filled with self-hatred. But enough about that. By my senior year, I was Miss High School. I was the ASB president, involved in almost everything, and I won prom queen with the quarterback. I even won homecoming queen with the guy I mentioned earlier. Let's call him Will. My life seemed to be turning around, and I was finally emerging from the shadows of depression. After prom, Will and I ended up at a bonfire where he kissed me. He was drunk, and I was the designated driver, so I didn't think much of it. I still had that middle school crush on him, but I didn't take it seriously because he was intoxicated. Later that year, we hung out and kissed again. We had a good conversation, but suddenly, he stopped talking to me. It was painful, but I couldn't let go of the desire for affection that my online relationships couldn't fully satisfy. Like holding hands, kissing, and more. The night before I left for college, we hung out again. We confessed our feelings for each other, and we ended up being intimate. Afterward, we just lay there, gazing into each other's eyes, trying to remember every detail. He told me he wished I didn't have to leave, that he wanted to be with me, and how beautiful I was. Needless to say, I fell for him again, but once more he abruptly stopped communicating with me. I tried to console myself by thinking that we were miles apart and I'd never have to deal with him again. But life has a funny way of surprising you. During spring break of my freshman year, I saw him at a party. It was awkward at first, but we hugged and were cordial. It seemed like whenever I entered a room, he'd leave, and vice versa. However, after gaining some liquid courage, he came over to apologize. I told him I forgave him, and the party continued. As the night wore on, everyone got a bit drunk and started sharing stories. While telling one of his stories, Will kept looking directly at me. After he finished, he leaned in and kissed me, right in front of everyone. I was shocked, but it felt right, as if it were meant to be our moment. By the end of the night, we had kissed again. He tried to initiate intimacy, but I declined, not wanting to get hurt again. He suggested we just lie down together, and in my intoxicated state, it sounded comforting. As we lay there, things escalated, but at one point, I began to sober up and started to panic. I asked him to stop, apologizing and saying I couldn't continue. I had convinced myself that physical closeness could somehow make him love me, but he didn't stop when I asked. Eventually, it became painful, and I had to push him off me. I felt helpless and defeated. After a while, I just let it happen, and he passed out soon after. By then, everyone else had left the party, leaving the house cold, dark, and empty. I found a spot on the couch and cried. I tried calling my best friend for a ride, but she had class the next morning, and it was 4 a.m. I managed to call another friend, but she, like everyone else, assumed that I had willingly been with Will. I confided only in my best friend about what had truly happened. My best friend was dating Will's cousin at the time, so naturally she told him. He then informed Will's brother, who told Will. Will was devastated when he heard. He called my best friend in tears, apologizing and insisting that he never meant to hurt me. He said he loved and cared about me. I ignored his calls, but he resorted to texting. I finally replied, telling him that I forgave him, but asked him never to treat another girl like that. Strangely, I never fully acknowledged that what happened was assault, likely because I was so blinded by my feelings for him. I realize now that I had more to share than I initially thought. If anyone reads this, please comment or respond. I don't intend to seek validation, but it feels freeing to let it all out. I'm curious to know how many people now know my secrets. Story 31. I'm only 19, but I've already struggled with heavy drinking, and much of my life has been built on lies. I've lied about various things, including personal struggles and past experiences. I often feel passive and let things happen that I later regret, which sometimes leads me to drink to numb the feelings. I tend to make choices based on what seems beneficial in the moment, even if it means hurting someone close to me. I frequently seek sympathy from others, sometimes for things I've exaggerated or even caused myself. Every day, I wake up trying to figure out how to get by with minimal effort. I create a false persona for others, allowing me to gain a sense of security that I can exploit if necessary. Most of my friends and roommates underestimate me because of this act, which I use to my advantage. I often find myself lying, cheating, or manipulating situations to get through the day. I haven't been able to break this cycle, and I sometimes turn to drinking as a way to escape from the consequences of my actions. Story 22. My military career has been the most challenging part of my life, and my biggest regret. It's a chapter that I've kept largely hidden from my wife, making me feel unworthy of my family and daughter, and hindering my ability to build a relationship with her. I served 4 years as active duty in the Army, specializing in a combat field. I enlisted right after high school, motivated by a family legacy and a desire to follow in my father's footsteps. At the time, I believed it was a noble path, though I didn't fully understand the reality of it. During those 4 years, I was deployed twice, once to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. At 19, I found myself in the middle of a harsh environment, feeling lost and wondering what I had gotten myself into. One day, while our unit had paused to survey and secure an area, a young child approached our vehicles. It wasn't unusual. We were often approached by children asking for rations or candy. However, this time was different. The child, about 8 years old, was alone. Suddenly, a senior officer yelled at me to shoot as I was standing between him and the child, blocking his line of fire. At that moment, I was still just a teenager myself and couldn't comprehend why I needed to harm a child. It simply didn't make sense to me. But in the time I hesitated, the child managed to throw a grenade into one of our vehicles, causing severe injuries to 3 of my comrades. The shock of the event jolted me out of my confusion, and I reacted by firing at the child. My superiors later told me that I did what was required, but that I acted a moment too late. To this day, I still see the child's face in my nightmares. I often wake up feeling the heat of the sun and the vivid memories of that place. But most of all, I am haunted by the memory of that child. I haven't shared this story with my wife. She knows I served in the Army, but I've never mentioned my deployments. I fear how she would perceive me if she knew, especially since I already struggle to see myself as anything other than a flawed individual. When my wife told me she was pregnant, it was the happiest moment of my life. Yet when I first held my daughter 9 months later, instead of being overwhelmed with joy, I was filled with grief, guilt, and a deep sense of unworthiness. When I hold my daughter, I am painfully aware that I have taken away from another what I am now experiencing. I can't justify to myself why I deserve to feel the joy of being a father after taking someone else's child from them. This realization breaks my heart and makes me wonder if I'd be of more value to my daughter as a life insurance policy than as a father. When I was young, my mother and I were on the run from my unstable father. He had completely lost touch with reality and was convinced that he needed to take both of us to heaven with him, or something along those lines. One night, we stopped at a rundown hotel in the middle of nowhere. As we settled in for the night, I heard a vehicle pull up outside. By this point, we'd been on the run for months, so I was always on edge. I got up to look out the window and saw an old man getting out of a truck. Feeling a bit reassured, I turned away from the window, but then I heard another car door close. When I looked back out, I saw nothing. Despite being uneasy, I decided it wasn't worth waking my mom. She hadn't been sleeping well for a long time, and I didn't want my paranoia to add to her stress. So, I laid back down and tried to get some rest. About 20 minutes later, I was stirred by a noise. I turned over to check on my mom, but instead I saw the door to our hotel room being forced open, only held by the chain lock. My father was at the door, attempting to cut the chain. I jumped out of bed and rushed to wake my mom. In her drowsiness, she stumbled and fell. Running on adrenaline, I lifted her up and dragged her toward the bathroom window. I smashed the window open, breaking the glass, and helped my mom climb through. As she landed on the other side, I heard the door burst open behind me. I quickly followed, landing on my mom's leg as I scrambled through the window. She cried out in pain, and when I tried to help her up, she couldn't put weight on the leg I had just landed on. I panicked, unsure of what to do. I picked her up again and ran toward a nearby shed used for pool equipment. I hid her inside, then looked back. There was no sign of my father. I thought hiding her there might work, so I decided to go back and try to get the car, leaving my mom behind. As I approached the corner of the hotel, my father suddenly grabbed my arm, nearly pulling me off my feet. He pulled out a knife, but I managed to break free before he could use it. I ran toward the road, desperately trying to escape, convinced he was about to catch me. I saw a car coming and barely made it across the road before collapsing in exhaustion. The driver of the car, seeing me fall, stopped and approached me. "Hey kid, are you all right?" he asked, extending his hand to help. But before I could respond, my father appeared behind him and attacked the man with the knife. I was frozen in shock as the man fell to the ground. My father turned his emotionless gaze toward me and began walking in my direction. I was terrified. Somehow my legs managed to move, and to this day, I don't know how I managed to escape. When I made it back to the hotel, my mother was still safely inside the shed. The truck, the stranger, and his car were all gone. I never told my mother what happened that night, and as far as I know, that man became just another missing person. Story 23. I tend to let people take financial advantage of me, and I often feel like I'm a boring person. After my ex-girlfriend's mother passed away, she asked me to move in with her, and I ended up living in her mother's room. At that time, I had saved about $20,000 by working hard at a good company, and I was only 22. A year later, I was left with barely $1,000. Meanwhile, my ex was seeing multiple guys from the apartment complex and wasn't working. I doubt I'll ever see any of the $6,000 she owes me. I've often given money to friends and friends, never getting paid back or receiving any form of appreciation. I used to drive long distances just to see people, always spending money like it was nothing, hoping it would make them like me or help me when I needed it. Even now, it's hard to get anyone to stop by unless we're going out to eat or I'm offering free drinks. I've reached a point where I no longer care about anyone. Today, a friend from 7th grade stopped by. He rarely returns my calls or texts. I thought he was going to ask for money again, and I was afraid I'd finally tell him to leave and not come back. Back in college, I used to work a tough part-time job delivering newspapers in a rough neighborhood. I had to sprint up the stairs of each apartment building since most of those old housing projects didn't have elevators. I couldn't just walk up because I needed to get the newspapers to everyone by 6 a.m., or I'd face fines if people complained about late deliveries. And believe me, people love to complain. One subscriber lived on the top floor of a building with an incredibly slow elevator. Oddly enough, it became my favorite stop, as it was the only time I could take a break during the ride up and down. I would usually arrive at that building a little after 5 a.m., and every day without fail, I'd see an older woman outside feeding stray cats. It was part of the routine. After 4 months of this monotonous job, I decided to shake things up. I started my route from the last building on the list, working my way backward. It wasn't much, but it was something different to break up the mundane grind. When I finally got to my favorite building, it was earlier than usual, and for the first time, the old lady wasn't there feeding the cats. Instead, a group of cats sat by the building's glass door, waiting for her. It may not seem like much, but after 4 months of the same routine, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I was alive again, not just on autopilot. Feeling unexpectedly good, I walked in and called for the elevator, ready for my usual rest. But something was off. The elevator button was already lit up. I paused, realizing that someone was probably coming down. As I waited, a strange sense of excitement kicked in. In my youthful college mindset, I came up with a silly plan. I would hide beside the elevator and try to startle whoever was inside. It seemed like a fun idea at the time. Cue the disclaimer. This was not the best idea, especially in a bad part of town. I crouched next to the elevator as it slowly made its way down. My adrenaline was pumping, and as I reconsidered my plan, I thought, what if I scare the wrong person? I reassured myself that, worst-case scenario, I could offer them a free newspaper and apologize. Finally, the elevator arrived with a loud mechanical thud. The doors began to open, and as the first sliver of light appeared, I leaped up and shouted, "Boo!" as loud as I could. What happened next was a blur. I suddenly felt milk splashed all over me, and when I looked back, I saw the old woman lying motionless on the elevator floor. Panic washed over me. I glanced around for help, but all I saw were the cats outside, staring at me through the glass door. It dawned on me that it was the same woman who fed the cats every morning. I checked my watch. It was 4:57 a.m., right around the time I usually arrived. I was paralyzed with fear. With tears in my eyes, I slowly backed toward the exit, trying to convince myself this was just a nightmare. But before leaving, I realized I hadn't delivered the newspaper yet. If I left without doing so, someone might put 2 and 2 together and I could become a suspect. So I did the only thing I could think of. I carefully tucked the old lady's legs back into the elevator and got in with her, riding up to the 7th floor. The smell of spilled milk, cat food, and general mustiness filled the small space, nearly making me faint. It was the longest elevator ride of my life. Leaving that building while 17 cats stared at me felt like the ultimate walk of shame. I never saw any police or heard anyone ask about the woman afterward. I guess everyone assumed she had suffered a heart attack.